We're now going to look at places. How can we maximize the business opportunities that the Green Deal and the circular economy offer? And what do we do with smart cities? What do they mean? How can we implement them, develop them further? And how do we implement technology in a more urban context? We'll also look in this particular discussion at how sustainable tourism works, particularly in a post-pandemic world, because that's the framework in which we are holding this whole discussion, this whole dialogue today. And to take us through these four particular aspects, we are welcoming now our four panelists. So right next to me is Vasileios Rizos. He is Research Fellow and Head of Sustainable Resources and Circular Economy at CEPS, which is the Center for European Policy Studies. We have Katarina Hasbani. Katarina, next to him, is Partner and Global Director of Strategy and Advisory at AESG, a specialist consulting firm. Next to her is Stefan Schleuning. He's Head of Unit in charge of Industrialized Countries and Foreign Policy Support at the European Commission. And at the end of our row, we have Anja Reimann, who's Innovation Officer for the Chief Technology Officer at the City of Amsterdam. Welcome to all four of you. It's a pleasure to have you with us. And so we'll hear from you how each of you thinks that we can make the best of the Green Deal and the circular economy and the opportunities that they offer in general, but also more specifically in the case of smart cities and sustainable tourism in two specific cases. So maybe we'll start with you, Vasileios.
Perfect. Thank you, and many thanks for the invitation, first of all. It's a pleasure to be here. I guess you can hear me well, okay? So, yeah, let me just start by saying that I think it's really very interesting times for us that are involved in this discussion, in this debate on resource and circular economy, because the COVID crisis and the situation in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, has really brought the topic of access to resources and circular economy at the top of the political agenda. And of course, this is not the first time that we discuss in Europe about sustainable resource use, circular economy and Green Deal. We have strategies since years ago, but we really see for the first time maybe a new impetus. And of course, we have the preparation of the Raw Material Act proposal by the European Commission, which attracts a lot of attention in Brussels these days. Now, I don't know how many of you are joining events in Brussels. There are maybe too many of them these days on resources, but there are two statements we hear often. That first of all, that due to the situation in Ukraine, we have to, let's say, decouple our use of, or let's say, cut our energy ties with Russia, and that means acceleration to a renewable energy future, and of course, that means a metal-intensive economy. Now, that's one thing. The second thing is that we really see the convergence of different policy agendas. We see topics like sustainability, digitalization, strategic autonomy, competitiveness really coming together as one uniform agenda. And if you think about this, all of these agendas are actually connected. I mean, you cannot achieve sustainability or the Green Deal without digital technologies in place. You cannot achieve sustainability, or you cannot, or you will be at risk in achieving your sustainability objectives if you don't meet your strategic autonomy objectives. And of course, competitiveness is also linked to all of these agendas. So I think that really brings forward some key questions that are relevant for the EU, but also for the GCC region. First of all, are we prepared for such a massive transformation of our economy at a much larger pace? That's one question. Also, how important contribution can circular economy really make to an overall green economy in Europe? I think this is more of two rhetorical questions that many people think about these days. And very importantly, how we can actually get there. What can really drive us to more circularity, if we can define this? And I'm going to just give some points, and maybe we can dive them in more detail later. So I think, first of all, we will need new markets, and I think this is key. And that's key both for the EU and the GCC region. And of course, if we talk about new markets, we talk about different models, different use of resources, finding components, resources from other places of the world, and using, of course, global supply chains, which brings another round of questions and issues. And of course, but that also brings collaboration opportunities. Then we need to scale up new technologies, and I think that in many cases, in many sectors, the technologies are there. and you need to scale them up. And we have recycling technologies, new production processes, digital platforms. We see a lot of these things, a lot of innovation in Europe, but also globally. And there's a question, how you can scale up these technologies and what opportunities they bring as well. We need new alliances. If we speak about supply chains and how we bring more circularity, we need to bring, companies depend on each other, on products, components. They are part of global value chain, so you need new alliances, you need new collaborations in order to achieve this. And of course, in some cases, you need a new approach by governments. Of course, we have a lot of policies in Europe. I know that in GCC region, there is also moving in this direction, but not everything has worked perfectly well, of course, and there are a lot of lessons to learn and perhaps exchange insights and knowledge. So to be on time, I will conclude with really two messages, mostly for businesses. So I think we see a lot of trends in the market, but in many cases, we see acceleration of trends. So already some of these trends were already in place, and maybe the COVID and Ukraine has really brought them into, on the forefront of the debate. So I think this is a key message for businesses that, the economy is moving into this direction. Of course, there will be a lot more regulatory push in many aspects. If you see like the policies that are coming from Europe in the coming years, there will be a lot of policy action in certain domains. So in some cases, it's perhaps better to be prepared or maybe one step ahead, because very often innovation goes at a higher speed than policy. So I will stop here, and thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Stefan, how can we make the best of the Green Deal and the circular economy in this particular context?
Well, thank you, and happy to be with all of you this morning. Well, first of all, let me say when the von der Leyen Commission started, the Green Deal and the digital transformation were the two sort of top priorities. And still at the beginning of this year, it was all focused towards that within the EU and with our partners. Then February 24th happened, and then we now have, as you said, Vasileios, another sort of geopolitical situation, of course, that we have to take into account, and we have to do that in a way that it does not delay, it does not lower the ambition on the Green Deal agenda, because of course in the short term that's what we see sometimes. Being mentioned as almost unavoidable, but I think that's the main policy challenge, to deal with these issues in a way that even in the current situation, and even with this with the war in and on Ukraine, we do not lower our ambition on the Green Deal agenda. We build new partnerships, and I think this is where this event and the joint communication and EU-GCC relations really have a key role to play. There is a lot of impetus. There is a lot of high-level, political contacts. The EU institutions, also member states. I'm German myself. I think there were many visits also of senior German politicians to the region. So that's what we have to exploit to the fullest in the transition process, but then also, of course, renewable energies, hydrogen, and all of that. To do that with businesses in an ambitious regulatory setting. Of course, one other element we are, and I was in an internal discussion yesterday, and it's a bit of maybe Brussels jargon, but there is actually a big question behind, which is sort of the external dimension of our internal policies, right? So we have very high targets and goals when it comes to the Green Deal, and we have, carbon border adjustment mechanisms and all kinds of ambitious plans. And I think we agree, within the EU, we have the European Parliament, pushing often even more ambitious goals. But of course, all of that does have impact on our partners and friends globally. And I think it's important to discuss this early on and find ways that are really sort of allowing us to move forward together. So let me stop here for the moment. But indeed, the big challenge, as I've said, is at the beginning of the year we thought, okay, COVID is sort of slowly coming to an end. We all had, I don't know, most of us, over 3, 4, some even 5 shots, and now it can only get better. Well. So here we are, and we have another big challenge ahead of us. But we will have to find ways of dealing with it. And maybe the 2 years of COVID have shown us and helped us to strengthen our resilience, and that's something that we will also be using here. Thank you.
Indeed. Anja, from the point of view of smart cities, how can we really make the most of these opportunities offered by the Green Deal and circular economy?
Yeah, I think one important point, what we shouldn't forget, is that very often it falls to local governments to execute all these ambitions. So there are lots of talks and lots of, that's what we want to achieve, let's do it together. But in the end, cities, it falls to cities and other local governments to make it happen and make it happen in their cities. And very often it's a huge challenge. I think we all know theory and praxis is very different from each other. And also the continuous feedback you have to give to the people that make legislation, tell them, yeah, it's working or it's not working because, and then to adapt can be quite difficult. So I think smart cities, I think changed our perspective also after the pandemic. We focused in the last years a lot on efficiency. So the example of the traffic this morning in Brussels, that's one example, making traffic more efficient. Also another example, security. If we look what happened in South Korea during Halloween. So yeah, that's really a big point. So we utilized AI, other technologies to predict extreme crowds or used AI to make our trash system more efficient. But after all that, a city is still a city that you want to live in, you enjoy. So yes, it can be very efficient, but in the end, if you tell someone why you live where you live, you don't say, oh, my city is very efficient and that's why I live there. No. It's about the people. It's about, enough places that you can come together and socialize. And I think that's what makes a city. And we really had to adjust our view on what a smart city is and what that asks from us as city makers to provide citizens with certain opportunities, like to meet, but also to participate in these transitions that we just mentioned. So that's all very big words, but what does that mean to the people that live in the city and don't have that much money? Can they participate in the energy transition? Can they put solar panels on their roof? Probably not. So how can we include them and also look at a prosperity for all and not just for selected groups?
Indeed, a few more questions raised there, so I think we're going to try and tap into them as we go. Katarina, in your experience, what's the best way of making the most of these challenges and opportunities?
Sustainability is quite interestingly one tool that the governments in GCC are using to tackle what has come out of pandemic. And let me explain step by step what I mean by that. But before I have to explain what I do, so that you get a bit of the context, I'm a global director and partner for AESG. It stands for Alabar Energy and Sustainability Group. We are a locally started consultancy from United Arab Emirates, and we specialize in sustainability and environmental consulting now for over 11 years. Most of our work is in UAE and Saudi Arabia in GCC, and we advise government entities and government-owned companies mostly on development of their sustainability and decarbonization plans. From the perspective of how does it really integrate in their business. So that's the angle that I take, and I can tell you we are very busy. There is a lot of work ongoing in this area. And I know there is a lot that you read in the press about, is this real? Well, I can tell you it is real. And one of the reasons is COVID. What happened during COVID, I think the governments in GCC had a real realization, and not just governments, the businesses, the citizens. I spent my time there. About few challenges that we are facing, living in this from climate perspective, quite challenging environment. The first one is the challenge of that came through COVID was the challenge of connectivity, right? Suddenly, the idea that we will be cut off from supplies of everything, right? Challenge our thinking about how we design the economy in GCC. The second one was something similar, was, how can we enhance the local element? How can we create local supplies? How can we, grow, for example, food locally? And then the third element was about change in the relationships that we have with the whole supply chain, whether in the region, whether with other countries in the world. And this all is actually part of the sustainability agenda, right? So the governments in the region that have already been thinking about working on the topic of sustainability have realized that by pushing this agenda, they are really addressing many different challenges that are coming out from COVID. And I'll give you 3 examples just for those who are skeptics. You also have some tangible points that you can take away. First, in the work that I do, a lot of it is about looking at the design and operation of physical assets, buildings, infrastructure. We see a lot of requests coming about integrating a whole life cycle perspective. What is the full life cycle cost of maintenance? Is it better to pay a bit more in advance because then during the life cycle of the asset you are spending less? This is something new. We wouldn't be asked by our clients to do something like that. They would be asking us before, whatever is the cheapest, we'll go for it, right? But now businesses are thinking differently. The second element that came also through COVID at the level of citizens is realization about the costs of energy, water supply, whether it's electricity, people are spending more time at home, or fuel. Very recently, the fuel costs have increased. And the citizens felt it, for example, in UAE. And finally, government, seeing the situation, started to put in place different types of tools, policies, via the projects that my team is working on, whether it's in the area of sustainability, providing sustainability guidelines to businesses in different sectors, whether it's via, putting in place certain type of tools to help businesses and individuals to understand their carbon footprint. So this, is a very tangible way how the pandemic, which could have had a very negative impact on the region, actually created something very positive. And I'll go more into the details in the following round of questions on specific sectors. But this is my take on the topic, after now 4 years there. Second time around, so altogether I've been in the region for 10 years. Yeah.
Thank you. Indeed, if any of you would like to pick up on something that the other ones said, please feel free, just let me know. We really would like this to be as interactive as possible. But to dig a little deeper into the points that you made, you said generally that COVID has transformed the way we think, the way you have now started approaching things. In terms of how we live and consume and travel in our daily life in both the EU and the GCC, which of the changes brought by COVID are there to stay, are likely to stay and last, and maybe become even new habits? Would you maybe have a few ideas, a few examples in mind, Vasileios?
I'll try my best. No, this is a very relevant question, and actually during the period of the crisis, SEPS, my organization, we did a research on companies implementing circular economy business models, both in the electronics and the food value chain, and of course we incorporated the COVID aspect. And we got some interesting insights that I think are useful for the discussion as well. First of all, of course, COVID changed our life and our consumption patterns, and that affected companies in different ways depending on the business model that they have in place, because if you think about circularity and the way we use resources, we're talking about a variety of different business models. So in some cases, They were, let's say, for some companies that they were very much relying on retail access. Maybe they weren't very much established also on the online domain. They experienced issues, demand impacts, let's say, negative demand impacts. Some of it stabilized later. Then there was a set of companies putting in place, let's say, different models, refurbished products, reused products, in the market that they experienced actually a positive trend, and that was interpreted in different ways. On the one hand, it was the cost of this product that was lower. Then on the other hand, maybe an increase, let's say, awareness on about sustainability, among consumers. So there were some demand impacts that varied across the companies. Of course, then there were the supply chain disruptions that they were crucial, and of course, I think it happened everywhere. And that gave a lot of thoughts to the companies, and very importantly, and to answer your last question about what is here to stay, one of the key questions we asked to these companies, and some of them were large companies in these industries, was how did this affect their strategic thinking? And there were actually cases of companies that they responded that because of the crisis, because of the situation, they were influenced to rethink their whole model, how they operate, how they function. So basically go into a different direction. So that means changes that are going to remain. And of course, that's also linked to the increased focus on resilience and planning. And that goes back to my first point that, if you think about circularity, sustainability, it is very much linked to resilience, strategic autonomy. And that's not only relevant for the EU, but also for the EU as a region, but for companies individually as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anja, in terms of cities, what changes have you seen in inhabitants' behaviors and approaches, and which of these changes do you think are there to last?
I think what we saw is that ordering things increased a lot, and also with that the trash problem. So suddenly all our containers were flooded with cartons because everyone has been ordering. And unfortunately, that's here to stay. So people have not stopped doing that. So we see still an increase in that. And how the city tried to tackle that is actually by coming up with city hubs, mobility hubs, where we try to also include now logistic hubs, so that people can go there to pick it up. That's one thing about like having too many cars in the streets everywhere, delivery cars. And the other thing, the trash problem, that we're still struggling with that. So yes, we can use AI to a certain extent, but in the end, someone still needs to come and pick it up. That's not going to change. And another thing I think is speed, the way we work. The work in the city has become faster. Collaboration has become faster because now we do use calling and with teams and digital ways of working together. So that has become way more established and accepted than before. And that, I think, is a positive effect because governments are known to move slowly, and that will definitely help. Mm-hmm. So that's here to stay as well. Mm-hmm.
But definitely some aspects that could not have been anticipated, such as indeed the trash problem, and with which now you have to catch up in order to meet the requirements of the Green Deal and of circular economy.
Yes, that's for sure.
Yeah. Stefan, from your point of view, which changes are there to stay, if any?
Well, many. The way we work. Pre-COVID, we came to the office every day. I remember, that's more an anecdote, but 20 years ago when I asked my then boss whether I could work from home one afternoon because we had a small child, he looked at me like, what's wrong with this guy, So now, already before that started, of course, but COVID was a huge accelerator. We now have a system in the Commission that everybody needs to be in the office 2 days per week. Everybody is entitled to one day at home, and the remaining 2 days are subject to individual agreements. Maybe another example of over-regulation in the EU, so very deep. But anyway, it's. So that's a big change. We have unit meetings now in a hybrid format, and a lot of people were afraid of this hybrid format. But actually, I think as is often the case, once you start doing things, they work much better than you anticipate. Also because technology has advanced and we got more used to it. At the same time, and then sort of representing the Commission or talking about international relations, diplomacy in general, I think it's also becoming clear that, even with the most advanced technology and hybrid meetings and all of that, presence and personal contact remain hugely important. Of course, we're also discussing concepts of, say, virtual embassies, for example, also embassy staff, international organizations, not being all the time, in the country of accreditation. But I think one has to acknowledge that a lot of the work we are doing depends on personal networks, on personal contacts, and in particular, difficult issues you cannot really solve in online meetings. That's my first conclusion already. And we also have, but colleagues from DG Trade or so can say more on that. I mean, to have difficult trade negotiations online, I think is not going to work. Mm-hmm. Then, quick second thought. Of course, we also, all of that has an impact on cities. I mean, there's a lot of, the part of Brussels we are in now. I think a lot of investment has been made into office space, assuming that all these companies and the institutions would have all of us coming to the office every day, which is no longer the case, which means there are a lot of empty offices, and we will have to, or the city of Brussels, many cities will have to develop concepts in using that space, which should be beneficial in the medium term, because this Euro quarter, this part of Brussels is basically dead over the weekend. So maybe there is an opportunity here as well. And last point, I think what has also become very clear is this. It's not globalization versus sort of going local. It has to be a combination of both, and I think I'm not sure we have advanced so much in how to make that possible. Global supply chains and trade is all good, but also makes us all very vulnerable. That's also one big lesson of the geopolitical situation. So we need more local contact, we need less dependency, more resilience, but at the same time, this should not lead to protectionism and sort of closing in and finding, I don't know, European solutions only. So we will have to find ways that this, less dependency does not translate into more protectionism, and that is, I think, that is a difficult one.
Yeah, absolutely, and particularly in the context of a dialogue like today's. Clearly, the door has to remain opened on both sides. I'll come back to you in a second. Add something, but I'll ask Katarina first. In your experience, Katarina, how about the GCC countries? How have habits changed?
Yeah, of course, they did a lot similar, and I can only echo what has been said here. In terms of way of working. Again, in the business that I am in, there was an unprecedented shift from serving our clients in their office to doing it from home. That's something unthinkable just 3 years ago, right? And what some of it is staying, by the way, some of it not. I think now we are more in this hybrid model where clients are okay if we work online, but they want to see us on a less regular basis, let's say, whereas we would be 5 days in the office, now it's like, okay, 1 day every 2 weeks, which makes us more efficient. The second thing that changed is the way we think about how the cities are designed, even in GCC. Before, we wouldn't have this idea of 15 to 20 minute cities, right? Having everything within 15, 20 minutes of your proximity. This has been a major shift with the changed way of working, is thinking of, I don't know, Dubai or Abu Dhabi, how can we create parts of the city where you can really live with everything that you need 15, 20 minutes in your vicinity? And it has already hugely improved the quality of life that we are experiencing because we can really sort of create these communities, mini cities within a bigger city. And of course, for companies such as mine, we really welcome this shift because then we start thinking about things like how can we optimize energy consumption within this mini city, how we can optimize waste management, how can we optimize water management and so on, right? And it becomes, or how can we optimize wastewater treatment, right? And these are very fundamental questions for making the GCC cities more sustainable. And finally, I want to reiterate on that point of governments just really creating new type of approaches. One, digital services. Dubai has already been pioneering this area before, but now really everything has become online, which wasn't the case before. As a citizen, you can be served really sometimes within minutes. The second part of integrating a new type of agenda is also integrating sustainability across all type of government policies or ways of organizing different type of industries. And finally, for what won't change in GCC is this realization that really the economic diversification has become crucial for the future of the region. And if before there have been perhaps some skeptics, towards diversification to non-oil sectors, now, this has become really major strategic priority. And just to give you an idea, and I can develop it later a bit around the topic of sustainable tourism, the UAE just 2 days ago announced new strategy for 2031, where they are planning 800 billion revenues by 2031 from non-oil sectors, and 450 billion of that is from tourism, right? So, yeah, it's really creating some interesting dynamics, and I think a lot of the points that I've mentioned will stay, right? We won't go back to how it was before.
Anja, you wanted to add something?
Yes, something that resonated was what was mentioned about assets and also about space. And something that also shifted a little bit was rethinking how we use the space that we have. So Amsterdam and also actually the entire Netherlands is highly urbanized, so we don't have that much space. And in cities that's especially a problem. What we saw during the pandemic is actually that people wanted to go to parks and go to recreational areas outside, and that was very difficult. So we don't have that many, and the few that we have, then we're also overcrowded. So now we're looking at the space that we have and look also into multi-usage of that space. An example are sport pitches. So we have lots of sport pitches in Amsterdam. They're made from artificial grass, artificial turf. It rains a lot in the Netherlands, so you cannot put normal grass because then you just have mud. But actually that poses large problems. In summer, it's really hot, gets 60 degrees hot. If you fall down, you burn your knees, basically. And also we use drinking water for maintenance, to cooling it and cleaning it. So that's absolutely ridiculous because it's raining a lot. Why not use rainwater? So we're trying to combine all these issues that we have, circularity, looking into can we not make a circular turf field? Can we not store water underneath? And also, can we not also use the sport pitch as an energy factory? Can we not somehow put, when it's not in use, a rollable solar carpet out and generate energy? So that's also something that shifted our perspective, and that is also there to stay.
Yeah, I'll come back to you about the redesign of cities and the new solutions. But Vasileios had a comment.
Just to add a little bit on COVID, because it's a huge topic, but to add a little bit the research perspective, I think this is the first winter where the changes are set in stone. We don't have restrictions. So that the new reality, let's say, is on board on a full scale. So that means that the research evidence on what does it mean on our productivity, on our life, on our quality of life, will come in the years to come from studies that are taking place now. Now, when it comes to sustainability, just to put here a degree of caution that not everything is black and white, and not every measure taken after COVID might be positive for sustainability necessarily. So you have to assess the impacts on individual case to case. And one good example, I think, is our energy consumption. So, more teleworking means people staying at home. If they use their own energy consumption, that might mean like a net positive effect in terms of energy consumption. I also heard that some universities will have decided to, in order to cut their own energy consumption, that they stop the heating at some point, certainly in the evening. So that means that the students then will go home or at where they stay in order to turn on the heater. So black and white and simplistic messages is something we should avoid, and we need careful research. Not everything is necessarily positive.
Yeah. Anja, I'd like to come back to what you were talking about and the new solutions and the new ideas that are coming now, and in particular following the pandemic. I mean, clearly, and Amsterdam is a very good case. Most of the cities around the world, and certainly many cities in Europe, were built centuries ago, were designed centuries ago, and they've had to adapt. Sometimes more easily than other times, the design at the time doesn't match at all the smart city design that would be desirable now. So what's best? Is it best to sort of bolt on new solutions to existing structures, or completely redesign, which seems quite impossible? We can't just erase the city and rebuild. So how do you strike a balance between these two aspects?
Yeah, so we do both. Of course, we have our historic city center. For example, we are now renovating all our quay walls. We have lots of canals in Amsterdam, and the quay walls are really old. I just learned yesterday, apparently they did a study, some colleagues of mine, asking some tram drivers when they cross bridges, how much it was moving. Because, exactly, not great. But apparently there was a research they did. And we're stuck with our quay walls, and we need to use what we have. So there we look into bolt-on options. We're looking into, can we generate energy by using surface temperature from the water and actually powering the houses that are built around the canals. So that there definitely we're looking into with what we have, and then we need to deal with that. Sometimes we have the luxury that a new building is built, and then of course, then we're using state-of-the-art technologies that is there. But even then, you build that, and then about 10 years later maybe, you already have new technology that you actually would like to use. So with current buildings that you build, you also need to take, now, these days, you can take that into account and think in a more modular way. So something that I built now, in 10 years, maybe I want to change that again. So that's something we're looking into, the modularity of things.
Katarina, I suppose in your case, looking at the cities that you've been working with, even what was done 10 years ago is outdated, almost.
Yes, and this discussion really resonates, Anja, what you've been mentioning even earlier. There is a lot of new development happening, of course, and we can see that the sustainability design is much more and more integrated. And we are looking at a lot of examples from Netherlands, not just in cities, but in port design, for example, and so on. But there is a real problem of what to do with the older buildings. And I've been actually involved in a series of policies, specifically in the UAE, around the topic of energy efficiency and demand-side management. So how can we improve the efficiency of energy consumption in these buildings? And, the costs of retrofit, similar as in the EU, I know it's the same challenge here. The deep, retrofits have very long payback time. times. I mean, now on the back of the current crisis, they are a bit more interesting. The business case is better. But in the GCC still we have this issue. So one of the things that has come out quite interestingly is what Anja mentioned is how can we repurpose the spaces to be used for different type of uses. You know, one of the problems with the existing buildings is that they are used just for one purpose, and offices have been empty, you know, I don't know, schools, pupils haven't been going there, right? So can we use the same space for other things? Can a school be a school during the day, and the evening can it be some sort of meeting space, right, and venue space and so on? Can the offices, again, you know, either partly be transformed into apartments or shops and so on? So that's one thing I've seen. There are a lot of, at least ideas, if not implementation around that, which is, you know, new. The government is looking into ways how to incentivize the retrofits, but not only that, private companies are now actually going ahead, and I've seen requests for proposals from some of the bigger developers and asset managers to find new ways how to deliver retrofits, for example, via energy retrofit as a service, which is quite innovative for the market that I am in and so on. So there are a few things happening, and but it's still, it is a challenge what we do with the assets that we have already built. And you know, I think it's probably the great area for collaboration, right? Because everyone is trying to innovate in something else, and together we can have a better outcome. So yeah, maybe something to follow up on from here.
Indeed. I'd like to take a quick minute to look at where Christophe stands with his progress on this particular session. So we get a teaser of what we're going to be able to look at over lunch. So let's see where he stands in the process of designing this particular session. In visual feedback, there we are. City layout, proximity, yes. Yes, how things changed. Consumption, trash, wastewater. I like the sports and the parks illustration. So we'll let him continue and check at the end of our session again. Stefan, looking at things more from the policy angle, what do you think can be the main opportunities for the EU, but also for GCC countries? I mean, working on circular economy and Green Deal together, looking at those particular I was going to say promises, maybe not promises, but projects.
Well, I mean, I think the investment opportunities are huge. You know, as I said at the beginning, I think in terms of EU-GCC relations, I see very, you know, positive dynamics and developments and partnerships getting stronger. You know, we have the World Cup going on, and of course we also have debates around the World Cup. But still, I think it's a great event, bringing people together. And you know, as I said, in the current geopolitical situation, the opportunities in terms, in particular, you know, if the economy is further diversified, but around energy, clean, I mean, the whole clean energy, renewable energy agenda, I mean, the opportunities are huge, and I think we see take up there, but there is a lot of potential to take that further. Of course, it has to happen, I think, in a certain, you know, as I said, regulatory and political framework. But I think we are developing this together. I think we have this, you know, joint, or we are developing this partnership, some sort of joint vision. I think we don't have to see every single issue exactly the same way, but I think we have to talk about them openly and constructively. Also accept that, you know, changes are always sort of evolutionary processes, and I think sometimes also from the EU perspective, we sort of take for granted that certain sort of, I don't know, rules or issues we have today look quite differently a couple of years or a couple of decades ago. I think that sometimes is something we forget. But in a nutshell, and for a business forum, I mean, I think the the opportunities are obvious, and I think again our president, Ms. von der Leyen, gave a speech a couple of days ago, which also emphasized very much these huge opportunities. And then, if you allow me, just maybe one more minute, because I think you said something before. I mean, and that's the social aspect. I think is very important in all of that, and I mean that's almost more in a personal capacity, but we have to realize that also the way COVID was perceived, the way families, individuals lived through COVID depended largely on social status and income, on living conditions, and probably most, if not all of us in that room are privileged one way or another, and experienced that period in a very different way to, I don't know, families sharing a 40, 50 square meter apartment in the outskirts of Berlin or Paris or in the GCC region. And also this whole, hybrid working, teleworking. I mean, I don't have figures, but I mean, we are talking about certain segments of the labor market, in terms of the traveling and all of that. So I think that's for policymakers, but also for businesses, something to keep in mind, because we already see a certain polarization of societies, and I think that's a dangerous process. And there are lots of opportunities we talk about on occasions like that, but there are risks if that this social divide in Europe and beyond is further deepened if we make this sort of elite-focused discourse. But as I said, that was more of a personal reflection, but I think it's a very important point.
Yeah, very relevant indeed. I'd like to open the floor to questions from the room, if we have any, to continue. We have none? No? Yes, please. Where is the young lady with the mic? I don't know, we seem to have lost the young lady with the mic. We have another young lady with the mic. Thank you. It's on, don't worry.
It's on, okay, great. Mareike Mein, GFA Consulting Group. Thank you very much, very interesting discussion. I have a question to Anja about the waste, which is shocking, and I've also seen it, and I'm wondering whether you have some kind of recycling system in mind, where companies, together with the communities, agree on a recycling system, and you also maybe tax those companies that don't participate in it.
There you already mentioned your solution. That's great. Would love to have that. We are not there yet. I think it's our ambition to work on that. But I have to say the actions on that are not there yet. And also we we always say, okay, trash, it's a resource and we need to see it as a resource. But in the end, we are not really doing enough there yet. We really need to. And also we need to collaborate with businesses more to find a solution. In the end, we're still shipping lots of our trash outside of the Netherlands. Personally, I think that's we shouldn't do that. Should be our problem. And indeed, if you look at companies, supermarkets, there are some supermarkets that already move towards less plastic or like unpackaged fruits and vegetables, but some really don't. And we're in constant talks with them to fix that, but it's not enough. So it's really a criticism to ourselves. We need to do more.
Thank you. Any other question from the room? Because I have questions anyway, because I think we have quite a few topics that we still need to touch upon, and looking at the time, we probably won't even have time to touch upon all of them. But maybe I'll come back to you, Vasileios, about something that Stefan mentioned on. I mean, circular economy policies have been around for a while. It's not something new. We've been talking about that for quite a while, but they're a bit slow. I mean, Stefan mentioned earlier that indeed, of course, the Ukrainian invasion has, or rather the invasion of Ukraine, has changed things and has certainly slowed down the whole process of Green Deal and circular economy and so on, because all of a sudden there was an emergency to deal with. But slowing down doesn't mean hampering. So, you know, what are the main blockages? Why are these policies so slow to be implemented? Or why are they implemented, you know, here and there, but it seems more difficult to have an overall shift?
How much time do I have?
A minute?
A minute, okay. Okay, good. So we've done a lot of research on barriers and enable circular economy. Have a look at our website. We have a few research papers there. One important remark, because a lot of people, you know, are asking about this. You know, how are we getting there? How do we achieve a fully circular economy? And we should be reminded, keeping in mind also there have been hundreds, or I don't know, maybe more research papers published in the last 10 years on circular economy, that it is an abstract concept that cannot be defined by a single indicator. So I'm not sure if we will ever be in the position to say we are now living in a fully circular economy. Plus, sustainability concepts evolve as our knowledge evolves. So how circularity and sustainability will be defined as we approach maybe carbon neutrality in a few decades might be different than today. That said, I would say that the key barriers that we see that are also very policy relevant are technology. Of course, is a barrier, but I wouldn't put it really at the top of the pyramid of barriers. And I think a lot of it comes from supply chains. And I know it's being repeated quite a few times today already. But in the end, it is about supply chains, because most of these companies, they depend on others, on their products, components, materials that they get input from. Most of it very often comes from global supply chains. And that we should keep in mind when we speak about more circular economy, and using regional supply chains doesn't mean less global value chains, because that, you know, it's not practically possible. And I don't think it's going to happen. So supply chain is an area where policy action is needed. And I think there have been steps by the European Commission. For example, the product passport that is being discussed in the context of the battery regulation will address the topic of transparency across supply chain. That's one area. Eco-design requirements. You know, there's a new proposal, eco-design regulation, that will raise the bar of ambition, and of course finance. In the end, a lot of these processes are more expensive, you know, and that comes down to the cost of virgin materials, extraction of virgin materials, which doesn't incorporate the full environmental impacts, and that cost carries then across the supply chain. So, yeah, a combination of barriers, but I would say supply chain is a key area where policy action is needed. Yeah.
Very good. Well, we will be talking about supply chain in the next panel. So I think maybe we'll, if not get some answers, at least push that question further. Katarina, you mentioned earlier on the concept or the implementation of sustainable tourism, and how do we actually minimize the negative impact of tourism, and on the other hand, maximize the positive ones? It seems really easier said than done.
Yeah,
Can you use your mic, please, just so that people online can hear us?
So I'm personally a big fan of market mechanisms, supply and demand, and that's what is encouraging about sustainable tourism. What has happened in COVID, and now I'll be speaking from the perspective of GCC, especially UAE and Saudi Arabia, is that local tourism started happening more, and meaning we've stayed in UAE, right? And we were looking for new ways how to travel in a limited way. And sustainability has emerged as one of the demands of the local tourists, right? So new options have been created that are, let's say, more sustainable from the wastewater energy perspective. Local food options emerged where, consumers are looking at local dining options with organic produce that is made in UAE. The second as especially Dubai opened very early on comparing to some of the other touristic regions and cities, we've received tourists that weren't coming before to Dubai. And they came from places that push sustainability agenda. So we benefited from the sort of spillover effect, for example, of the European tourists that came and they're like, okay, I'm here, you know, which hotel is sustainable or which restaurant is sustainable. So again, that created that, you know, push by via the demand. And finally, the government, of course, picked up on this. And to answer your initial question on how can we really make it happen, I think this is really where the government regulations can make the change, right? So I worked on a few projects where guidelines were developed for different types of operators in the tourism sector in the region, you know, hotels, restaurants, travel agencies, that sort of define for the companies what is sustainability, what are the criteria, KPIs. There will be a system that will be put in place, maybe not mandatory at the beginning, but will progressively transition into a mandatory type of requirement, which then will be scored, you know, so they, again, we go back to the customers, the travelers will be able to, when they come and they want to book in a hotel, right, or in a restaurant in the region, they will find options that are sustainable or have certain type of carbon footprint. So all this, you know, I think it's awareness, education, first topic. The second is creating those frameworks, whether regulatory, mandatory or not, and then tools, giving tools, especially to there was someone representing SMEs before. You know, I'm not concerned about the big corporates, but the SME type of companies will need support.
Thank you. Anja?
Yeah, a small comment on that. We're trying to make it sustainable by simply decreasing the number of tourists. So yeah, it was a really hard choice to make for the city council because, of course, it brings in a lot of revenue, a revenue that we need also to invest in houses and everything. But the choice, nevertheless, has been made to decrease the amount of tourists. And we do that by limiting the permits of hotels. We're looking at Venice, how they're using an entrance ticket to their historical part. So, yes, that's basically what we're trying to do.
Right. So don't go to Amsterdam. Now you got the message. Or if you do, not all together. Thank you very much to all four of you.